this is part 2 of a 2-part series. I'm not sure if you were at the summer training, but our summer training, if we look here, I like to call it, the summer training was the satellite view. And if you take a look at this picture, the little A there, that's my house. Let me just throw out this question. What do you know about my house from that picture? You can make some generalizations. It's in the city. There you go. Nice orderly blocks. If it was better resolution, you could see that it's pretty green. Lots of trees there. Look at this next slide. That's similar to part 1 that we had in the summer, I think. Like this picture, our part 1 training about multilingual students kind of gave us some general overview, like what are some common difficulties faced by a multilingual student, what are the different value systems they have with writing, what kind of difficulties do they have interpreting assignments, things like that. This presentation, this is also my house, is like the street view. It's the multilingual street view. And if you're looking at this picture, you can see that, oh, her house is yellow and maroon, and she's got a banana tree growing in her front yard, and her steps are falling apart, but she has a really nice cement driveway. And so in this session, we're going to look more at principles of communication with multilinguals, and then we're going to dive right in and look at, okay, you're sitting face to face with somebody, what do you do now? And so the things we talked about before were more of an overview, and this is you're upfront and personal with somebody. So to start with, I have a little simulation I'd like to do. And you need a partner for this. And this will work okay. I think if you two could be partners, and you two could be partners, you two are partners. Raquel, would you mind observing these two? I think that would be easier for you anyways. Decide who will be A and who will be B. Okay, if you are partner A, I'd like you to look at the next slide and read it silently to yourself. Partner B, close your eyes or look at the ground or something like that, okay? So, partner A, take a minute to read this. Got it? You understand what you'll be doing with these? All right. Now, partner A, look at the ground. Close your eyes. Partner B, if you could read your slide. The key part is, do you understand the questions you are to ask? There's just 2 possible questions. Okay. All right. Go ahead and turn to your partner, and partner A, begin your description.
All right.
Good. Okay. Oh, close to done? No. That's all right. That's actually part of the point. Okay. Partner A, what did you find most frustrating about describing the makings of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? You wanted to use your hands to say spread. What else? Were you able to do it as quickly as you normally would have been able to do it? It took longer, right? Yeah. Partner B, what was frustrating to you about listening to partner A? Maybe frustrating is too strong of a word, but what was there anything that made you feel a little bit uncomfortable?
It's like, you're missing something. Like you're not totally getting what you're supposed to be getting.
Yeah.
Even though, I know what a few easy sandwiches, but.
Right. Yeah, you realized pretty quickly what it was. Did you feel like any kind of pain, like, oh, this would be so much easier if she could just say peanut butter or jelly, or could just use your hands to describe slice or spread? Partner A, how is your communication style different from the way you normally talk?
Well, gestures are a bit better talking.
Mm-hmm.
And we couldn't use those.
Yeah.
It's hard to find synonyms for such common words.
It is. Words that everybody knows. Yeah. You probably, my guess is you're probably much more succinct when you normally talk. How about partner B? What do you think was effective? What did they do well when they were communicating?
They talked around the words they couldn't use.
Yes. If you'd like a fancy word that makes you sound really smart, that's called circumlocution. So you can throw that out in your ESL world and people will know what you're talking about. So I use this demonstration to kind of describe what you might be feeling like as you're listening to someone who's using their second language to communicate, that you think it's taking them a long time to get just a little bit out, and they're not able to go at it very directly. Sometimes they kind of go around like this, but also to illustrate how they might be feeling. Because if they were doing this in their first language, they might be able to just do it directly. And granted, they're able to use their hands, but I think sitting on your hands makes you feel just a little bit like there's something missing from your communication. And I think you feel that way when you're in your second language. You almost, I don't know if any of you speak a second language or have used that language in another country, but sometimes you don't feel like yourself. You know, when I'm operating in my second language, I don't always feel the same as I do when I operate in English. Or I feel a little bit like, gosh, here I am, I'm an educated person and I feel like a 5-year-old. Or I feel like I sound like a 5-year-old, and will people still respect me if I talk this way? And so this is the same thing that maybe some of your students are feeling when they sit down for a tutoring appointment. And so because of that, we're going to talk about some principles in communication when we talk to them. And there's 4 areas I want to look at: speech, body language, active listening, and just support in general. And this will be the quickest part of our time tonight, because I think a lot of this is second nature for a lot of people. The first area is just speech. As you noticed, you need to be aware of the rate of your speech. You also want to be aware of idioms and slang terms that you use that are understandable to you because they come from your worldview, but they might not be understandable to somebody else. For example, partner B was supposed to ask, what does slice mean? What does spread mean? And partner A maybe had to use the word synonym cut to help them understand. And so when you're speaking with a multilingual, you might want to be really aware of their facial expressions. Did you use a verb? Did you use an adjective? Something that they give you the look. And can you think of a synonym for that word? You might want to repeat important ideas in a couple different ways, if you can. In some disciplines, you can't. But if you think about the way people learn, we learn through reading, we learn through hearing, we learn through talking it out with somebody. Sometimes we learn best through diagrams. So if you think about that as a part of your speech, as a whole part of your arsenal of communication, you're more likely to hit on one of the things that will help them understand. Body language is the second area. And it's hard to give you really concrete tips on this because I don't know the students that will be coming into you. But be aware that body language is different in different cultures. A student may sit closer to you than you're used to. They may sit further from you than you're used to. If they're Asian, they may not meet your eyes. They might look more down at the ground. Touching is different. And I don't imagine that there's not necessarily a lot of touching between tutors. But on occasion, I'll have somebody that I'm sitting down with that's really overwrought or just stressed out. And it's an okay moment. It might be an okay moment when I'm working with an American student that I might put my hand on their arm. It's going to be okay, or one of these where I may ask the student first, hey, is it okay if I just give you a little hug, or you're going to be okay? I might give their hand a squeeze or something, but I usually ask permission first. And often it's okay, but everybody's different, and be very aware of, obviously, of gender differences. I think I would never do that if it was a male student. If it was a female, I think women are a little bit more touchy-feely in that area. Be an active listener. You're going to want to provide some nonverbal affirmation through eye contact, through lots of nodding. Don't be aware of the way you cross your arms. Instead, lean forward towards them. Be good at asking clarifying questions. As many questions as you can. I know it's sometimes easy to just smile and nod if you're a little foggy, but that's not going to help the learner. So go ahead and ask those questions. Another thing you might want to think about is you're looking at their paper or their assignment. You may read something that they've written, or maybe they've done some sort of chemistry equation, who knows what it is. And your instinct might be to say, why did you do that? Or how did you do that? They might not know why. They might not have had, when you're writing in your first language, you might be writing or thinking, okay, I'm doing this way because I know the thesis is supposed to go at the beginning. They might not have had a logical reason for where they put the thesis. It might be they put it where they put it because that's where it would be put in their first language. It might be it just seemed like a good place to them. So one phrase that you can use that can be helpful is please explain. Instead of why did you do that or how did you do that, you might want to say, please explain this part a little more to me. Please tell me, what did you mean by this? It's a little bit less threatening to some people. Don't worry about this, but if it comes to your mind, you might want to try it. Or if you ask why and you get a blank stare, you might want to rephrase it as, please explain, da 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 da. And then do your best to give support. Validate multiple intelligences. Remember it, you can, when you describe the making of the peanut butter sandwich, and obviously you are as intelligent right now when you did that example as you were 10 minutes ago when you walked into this room, but you might have felt a little bit paralyzed or hindered when you were explaining it, and yet your intelligence level is still the same as it was before. And that's the same as the men and women you'll be meeting with as you tutor. Their intelligence level is the same. It just might not be coming out of their mouth, or you might not be seeing it in their papers or their homework in the way that you might if they were operating in their first language. Have some empathy and understanding for the cognitive, the mental load that this student needs to bear. For example, there are words that we all know, no matter what your major is. I'm guessing all of you know the words Alzheimer's disease, dementia. You're not a nurse, nobody was a nursing major, but you probably could tell me a little bit about what does an elderly person look like who has dementia, or what happens when you get Alzheimer's, because these words are just in our culture. But they're also nursing terms. So a student, for example, an African student, they don't have these concepts in Africa. They just say it's old age. There's not this understanding that these are diseases that happen to some old people and not other old people, that there are real causes for them. It's just all old age for them. So not only are they learning the manifestations of these diseases like the other nursing students, they're simply learning the vocabulary word, which we as a general population already know that vocabulary word. So their cognitive load is much heavier than a native speaker. Finally, use as many supportive resources as you can. If you've got a book, pull out a book. If you've got an online visual, use an online visual. Diagrams, graphic organizers, whatever you can to communicate that information in as many ways as possible and to hit on the different types of learners that they might be. All right, so you know how to talk to them. Now you're sitting down, they pull out their paper. maybe. Essentially, you've got three types of students that might come in. You've got the student who has their syllabus in hand and their description of their assignments, and they're looking at you in desperation, hoping that you can tell them what they need to do to start. That's best case scenario in my book, when they come in right at the beginning. The second type of student comes in and they've maybe finished a draft, and they say, here, help me make it good. This is type 2. Not bad. If they've got a week or so to work with, you're doing okay. The third type of student is the, hi, I have to turn this paper in 2 hours. Can you help me fix it? That's worst case scenario. So we're going to talk about each of these three types of scenarios and kind of what you can do for each situation. All right. No matter what, first thing you need to do, you need to read the assignment. It's important that you as the tutor understand what they need to do. You're going to look for things like format. Is it an essay? Is it a letter? Are they going to need to give proof or argue anything? You want to look at length. What are the length requirements? Has this person brought in 2 pages, but it's required to be 5 pages long? This is going to help guide your time. You're going to want to look for the required elements. Usually the syllabus will say you need X number of scholarly references. You need to give your personal opinion at the end. You need to incorporate what so-and-so says about whatever. So kind of in your mind, or if you need to on a piece of paper, make a mental checklist of everything that this paper must have to be a good paper. Sometimes I ask the student if it's okay for me to write on their syllabus, and then if they've already started the paper, I'll kind of check. I'll just put a little check mark by each of the things when I say, they got that one. They got that one. So that I know if they had it all. Essentially, what you're trying to do when they come in with just their syllabus is to break down the assignment in a way that they can understand. This has been my experience. They'll come in and they just don't know where to begin. It might be helpful even if you start writing some things down for them or have them write something down. Let's look at this. One of the problems that students might have trouble with is academic language. Here's some examples up here of academic language. In the sciences, you might have a phrase like, the change in X resulted from Y, or this process allows you to do yada, yada, yada. Words like process or influence or analogy aren't words that we can picture in our head. It's not a word where if you open up the dictionary, you see, dog. You open the dictionary, you can see a picture of a dog. When you see the word process, what does that mean? How do you define that? And so the terms for academic language are often really abstract and difficult to understand. And so these are what need defining for the student. I'll give you an example. Take a minute and read this assignment. It's an ecology assignment. You might need to read it twice. All right. What words stand out in there to you as important academic terms that are maybe abstract terms? Go ahead and just shout them out. Critique. Is critique usually a positive or a negative term? Often negative. That's important to know. What else? Seems. Persuading. It's a kind of writing, right? You have to know about persuading somebody in order to do this assignment correctly. Highlighting. Yeah. How do you highlight a key point? You're not using your yellow marker. So how does one do that with their writing? Anything else that you notice? What about, what do you notice their choices are? What kind of paper can they write?
An essay or a letter?
An essay or a letter, yeah. So there's two different possibilities for how the format might look on this assignment. Really different looking formats. I've had students come in where it says something / something else. They don't understand that this means you have two choices. They think it must be all together. So that's something to clarify. And you might need to describe the differences between the two of them to help them choose what one fits their personality better. In order to do this assignment correctly, the student needs to have read at least 2 articles. They need to read this Radical Environmentalism and Wilderness Protection. They need to have read the Patrick Curry description. They're probably going to need to have these papers with them in the assignment, is my recommendation. This assignment is one that I've been working on with a student. She brought it in a couple weeks ago. We had to go through the articles. We pulled the articles out. We found the key points together. What we next did, I don't know if you can see that, is we wrote out what a format might look like. We'd said, okay, you're going to need an introduction. And her professor said he wanted the thesis stated early and clearly. So we said, okay, you need to say why you're writing in the beginning and what's your main point. That's going to come right there. I didn't write those sentences for her. She can put the information in the right spot and put it in her words, but it helped her to know, okay, that's how I start out. And I know I need to put my main idea right at the beginning. Then the next paragraph, or section of paragraphs, is going to be about this guy named Guha and his key points. Remember, it said highlight Guha's key points. So we might say, okay, let's pick 3 key points, 3 of the most interesting points to you. Each of those can be a paragraph. And after you tell what that point is, you're going to say how you feel about it. Tell your audience, what did that make you think about? Then you need to talk about this guy named Patrick Curry. What does he think? What are his thoughts, and why are your thoughts now different from that? Then you're going to wrap it up. And this is persuasive. If you're trying to persuade somebody, you need to tell them what you want them to do. So you need to give them some instructions at the end of what is the next step that you hope that they'll do. So this is what we did in our first meeting together. She took it home. She had it in front of her. She found all the information and just slotted the sentences in the right spaces. Brought it back. It was great. All it needed was some transition between the paragraphs, which are also academic terms that you might need to use. So that's our first type of student. You've got them right at the beginning. You're going to help them see a picture of what this paper needs to look like. The second type of student is the student who's already done some work, and they want you to take a look at their paper and say how it is. There's 2 ways you could do this. Often when you get a paper, perhaps any paper, it's filled with a variety of sentence level errors, right? Your commas, your periods, your verbs, your S's, your plurals. What I think is a better way to approach it than that, I think our temptation is to start fixing all the commas first, right? I think it's better to look at rhetorical concerns, the format of the paper. Once again, you've got to go back. Let me see the assignment. What does this paper need to include? Do they have it all correctly? I like to think of this as the shape. What shape is it supposed to be in? And this might be a paper. It might be a math problem that has to be in a certain math way. It could be a theorem or a scientific principle, and they need to write a paragraph. And you're going to have a style in each of your majors of how that faculty wants that written out. And so you need to look at that assignment description and make sure, is the shape of their assignment the right shape? Then you can move on to looking at sentence level things. And this part is often where I have the assignment and I have their paper and I do the little checking. Do they have the right number of citations? Yes. Do they have an introduction? Yes. I tick them off one by one so that the student can see what's missing. I might circle the item on their syllabus. Look, it says you need a paragraph about this. Can you find it for me in your paragraph? Oh, I forgot that. Okay. Tonight, go home and add in this paragraph. Where would you like to put that paragraph? We talk about where that would go. If you start with all the sentence level problems first, you might have a beautiful looking paper, but it's not going to be in the right order. It might be missing important elements, and they may have to rearrange everything anyways. So the best thing to do is start with the shape, then go on to the sentences. These are some things that are included in the shape. Format, introduction, your thesis statement, paragraphing, your conclusion. So, sentence level problems, there's a couple of different kinds. First thing I want to talk about is something called global errors versus local errors. For example, let's say you're sitting in class and you want to describe your feelings towards that particular class, and instead of saying, I am bored, you say, I am boring. Totally different meaning, right? I am boring. Nobody wants to hang around with you. Okay? This is an example of a global error. Global errors are an error in a sentence that changes the meaning of that sentence. So you're reading your tutee's proof or her paper, and you see an error. You just don't have time to hit everyone. It's impossible. You want to look for the global errors, the errors that change the meaning of her paper to perhaps a meaning she'd rather not have. She'd rather not say, I am boring. An example of a local error, those students are bored. The correct way to say that is those students are bored. But if we have the S or we don't have the S on student, the meaning is still going to come across, right? You know what she means when she says those students are bored, and hopefully you're not. So that's the first part of looking at sentences. The second part would be aspects of grammar and lexis. Lexis means word-related problems. It could be improper verb tense. It could be, I forgot the S. It could be, I meant to use one word, but I used the other word, and now it doesn't make sense anymore. Here, your main goal isn't necessarily proofreading. You may not even get to this stage on a person's paper. It just depends on how much time you have with them. One thing that I recommend, because it takes so long to go through their paper with a fine-tooth comb, is to look for patterns. What's their biggest problem? Is it a verb tense problem? They're pretty good with subject and verb agreement, but they've picked past tense when they really ought to have present tense. Is their biggest problem grammar? Is their biggest problem run-on sentences? Pick a couple that you notice happening over and over and talk about those. Don't put this burden on yourself that you need to fix every one of them. The other thing that you don't need to worry about is you're going to have an ear, because I'm assuming you're all native speakers, for when something has been done wrong. You're going to have an ear for, yeah, you really should have used present perfect tense, even if you don't know the phrase present perfect tense. You're going to be able to fix I walked to school for 3 years to I have walked to school for 3 years. You might not know the reason why. That's okay. Sometimes I think international students, because they learned a language through rules, they might say, why? You can, if you know, you can tell them why. If you don't know, you can say, that's a long explanation. Let me get back to you on that. Or let's finish the paper first, and then we can talk about that. your job is not to be their grammar teacher. A multilingual student, because many of them learned their English by ear, they won't ask you why. They're just happy to have you tell them it should be this, and that's okay. Remember, you're not responsible for your student having a grammatically perfect paper. They have a lot of opportunities for other resources, and that's one of the tips I'm going to talk about a little bit later. What do you do with a paper that's not grammatically perfect? The last thing that's a good job for a tutor to do is provide correct idioms or collocations. I think most of us know what an idiom is. It's raining cats and dogs. You might see a spot in their paper where an idiom would be a great thing to add, where an American audience would read that and understand it much better if there were an idiom there. Or maybe they used an idiom from their culture and you kind of get it, but you know a better idiom in American English. You might want to suggest, hey, this is really fun, this idiom that you included. I really like learning about this aspect of your culture. You might want to think about using this one instead, because your American English audience will understand it better. Provide them with the right idiom. The other thing that you might need to help with is collocations. Collocations are things that we say in English, words that just go together. There's no reason why. We always say black and white. We say salt and pepper. We say hot and cold. It feels funny if you say cold and hot. It feels funny if you say pepper and salt. They always just go together that way. So you might notice some of those in your student's paper. Help them with that, because that's not something that they can usually learn from a grammar book. It's not something they would necessarily have learned in a class. Another thing to keep in mind is that some of these students have had a fair bit of English. They may even have English as their native language from their home country, but it's a dialect or a different version of English. So you might want to be careful about affirming them, to say, I understand what you mean here. Some varieties of English say it that way. In North American English, we usually say it this way. Affirm what they've written if you can understand it, and then tell them how we say it in North American English. Because there are a few students that may have an English background, particularly Liberians, Singaporeans, if you have any here, that speak English as their first language, but it's a different variety of English. So be careful about saying, we don't say it that way in English. That means in any English. Some places they might say it that way. So just say, that's nice, I understand what you mean. Maybe consider saying it this way. This is how we do it in North American English. Your third option, worst case scenario, your last minute encounter. Here's my paper, it's all pretty, I'm going to turn it in 2 hours, but I have just enough time to hit print again. If you would please just correct all of the errors. And you skim it over, and there's no way on earth you can make it beautiful in your 30-minute appointment. I think my first piece of advice is be honest. Say, there are some problems with this. I can't fix them all. I'll do my best to fix what I can. And fix what you can. You go through, add as many things as you can do to fix it, but the responsibility is really their responsibility to come in on time to get it done right. Encourage them to do so. This is a learning experience for them. Some cultures, it's probably okay to come in 2 hours before and maybe turn the paper in late or ask the professor for an extension. It's not okay here. And so that's a part of the learning experience as well. Do what you can. Praise what you can. In any of these three scenarios, one thing that you really ought to do is give as much affirmation as you can possibly give. When you give that first look through of their paper, before you say, hey, let's talk about format, tell them a couple things you really like about it. Let them know, oh, the way you said this is really descriptive. It's maybe not the way you would say it. maybe not the way we say it in North American English, but it's true that it's very descriptive. At best, you can even say, wow, you've put a lot of thought and time into this paper, because it's probably true. They have probably put more thought and time into that paper than it would take a native person to write out that paper. So affirm what you can. Give them praise and encouragement. The likely thing is they don't get enough of that in their life. Some final tips. Remember, you don't need to solve every problem or every grammar issue. One thing you can do is help students to find their own solutions. Encourage them to find proofreading strategies that work for them. Maybe they've got a friend in a class that would be a great proofreader. You can help them with format. You've got the tutor training on how to do it right format-wise. They can find another classmate who can put in their commas and their periods and fix all of their verbs. You don't need any special training to do that. If they don't want to do that, you might want to encourage them to read it out loud. One thing I do with my own papers is I read them out loud backwards. Not backwards, like if you look at this slide, I wouldn't say incoming for students a thank, but I'd read the last sentence first, and then the second to the last one, and then the one before that. Because when you're reading a paper from beginning to end over and over and over and over again, your eyes fill in words that are not actually there. So if you change up the order, read it from the end to the beginning, you might notice a missing word there, and read it out loud. A third thing I might encourage them to do, and this is, you need to be really careful about this because it could be embarrassing for them, but if they have a son or a daughter, a lot of the multilingual students are older. One of the gals I work with has a 14-year-old son, and he was born in the States. He's a native speaker. He can catch mistakes in his mom's paper that she can't. And so I sensitively said, when you're all done, after you've been done meeting with me, if you're comfortable with this, you might want to ask your son to read your paper. And I said, don't have him look for everything. If you know you have one particular problem, for example, you forget your S's, ask your son to read this paper and look for the S's for you, if you feel comfortable with that. That's obviously a hard thing to do. It's a humbling thing to be an adult working professional who needs to take your college level homework assignment to your 14-year-old and say, will you read my paper for me? So if you're going to suggest that, if you know your student well enough that you know they have older children, be as gentle and as sensitive as possible if you're going to suggest that. Remind them, encourage them to meet with the tutor as early as possible in the writing process. Remember, our best case scenario is when they come to you with the assignment right there. And then thank them. Thank them for coming in. It's a hard thing. Writing can be intensely personal. Especially, I think a lot of our multilingual students have come from really hard backgrounds. And I know maybe you have too. I can't make guesses about your backgrounds and what you might be writing about, but I know many multilingual students, their families have had to escape from war, they've had parents killed, they've had children killed, and sometimes that comes out in their papers. And so if they share a paper with you, thank them for it, because they've been brave and courageous to show somebody who might be younger than them, might have less experience in life than them, something that they tried hard to write. And so I usually just end my appointment by saying, thanks so much for coming in. It was a real pleasure to meet you. I really appreciate that you were willing to share your writing with me, and I enjoyed reading it. And I think that would make any student feel good and want to come back again. I think that's all I have. After listening to this, are there any questions that come to your mind, or maybe even as you've met with students, are there things that you've been wanting to ask somebody about?
Next time to my team, obviously, and something when I explain it to her,
So you're trying, you can explain it to her, and then you want her to put it in her own words to check for her comprehension. That's a great skill. That's a really good way to see, is she internalizing that? For math, maybe math is easier than English because she might be able to show her understanding by doing a sample problem or drawing a diagram to show that she's comprehended. So perhaps she can even do it wordlessly. For English, you may want to even write down several synonyms. So she's got her assignment. You explain it in new, more simpler terms. If you figure out the sticky word, the word that's really tripping her up, and if you can think of 2 or 3 words that mean the same, write those down with them. That might help her when she explains it in her words to refer back to, oh, Raquel said these 5 words all mean slice. Okay, I'll take this one and use it in my own explanation. That might help. Yeah, that's a hard one though. Any others? I am in the Ask Center on Wednesdays from 11:30 until 2:30. Sometimes there's students in there, sometimes there's not. Feel free, if you've got time at that time, feel free to pop in and say hi. If you've been working with a tutor or with a tutee on something and maybe a problem came up or you didn't know how to answer something, pop in. I'd love to meet you and talk with you one-on-one. We could talk about what you could have done differently or give you some ideas for that. It would make my day. So that's all I have for you. I hope you have a good night. Thanks.